Chapter 20. It felt good to walk in the shade of the two oak trees. Stanley wondered if this was how a committed man felt on his way to the electric chair, appreciating all things in life, all of the good things in life for the last time. They had to step around the holes to get to the cabin door. Stanley was surprised to see many around the cabin. He was have to expect that the warden to not want the campers digging too close to her home. But several holes were right up against the cabin wall. The holes were closer to here as well, were all of different shapes and sizes. Mr. Sawyer knocked on the door. Stanley still held the empty sack. Yes, the warden said, opening the door. There had been a little trouble out on the lake, Mr. Sir said. Caveman will tell you about it. The warden stared at Mr. Sir for a moment, and then her gaze turned to Stanley. He felt nothing but dread now. Come in, suppose. You're letting the cold out. It was air-conditioned in her cabin. The television was going. He picked up the remote and turned it off. She sat down on a canvas chair. She was barefoot and wearing shorts. Her legs were as freckled as her face and arms. So what does he have to tell me? Stanley took a breath to steady himself. While Mr. Sir was flicking the canteens, I snuck into the truck and stole his pack of sunflower seeds. I see, she turned to Mr. Sir. That's why you brought him here? Yes, but I think he's lying. I think someone else stole the sack, and Caveman is covering up for X-ray or somebody. It was a 20-pound sack, and he claims to have eaten them all by himself. He took the sack from Stanley and handed it to the warden. I see. The warden said again, the sack wasn't full. I spilled a lot, and you can check in my hole. In that room, Caveman, there's a small flowered case. Will you get it for me, please? She pointed to a door. Stanley looked at the door, then at a warden, then back at the door. He slowly walked to it. It was some kind of dressing room. With a sink, a mirror next to the sink, he saw the case and white pink roses. He brought it back to the warden and set it on the glass table in front of her. She unlatched the hatch and opened the case. It was a makeup case. Stanley's mother had one similar to, and she had several bottles of nail polish, a polish remover, a couple of lipstick tubes, and other jars and powder. The warden held up a small jar of dark red nail polish. You see this, Caveman? He nodded. This is my special nail polish. Do you see the dark, rich color? You can't buy that in a store. I have to make it myself. Stanley had no idea why she was showing it to him. He wondered why the warden would have never needed to wear nail polish or makeup. Do you want to know my secret ingredient? He raised and lowered his shoulder. The warden opened the bottle. Rattlesnake venom. With a small paintbrush, she began applying to the nails in her left hand. It's completely harmless when it's dry. She finished her left hand. Then she waved it in the air for a few seconds and began painting her nails on the right hands. It's only toxic when it's wet. She finished painting her nails, then stood up. She reached over and touched Stanley's face with her fingers. She ran sharp wet nails gently down the steak. He felt the skin tingle. The nail on her pinky just had barely touched the wound behind his ear. A sharp sting of pain caused him to jump back, and the warden turned to face Mr. Sir, who was sitting on the fireplace. Do you think he stole your sunflower seeds? No, he says he stole them, but I think it was. She stepped toward him and struck him across the face. Mr. Sir stared at her. She had 3 long marks standing across the left side of his face. Stanley didn't know it was the red necessary caused by her nail polish or his blood. It took a moment for the venom to sink in. Suddenly, Mr. Sir screamed and clutched his fan with both hands. He let himself fall over, rolling off the heart onto the rug. The warden spoke softly. I don't especially care about your sunflower seeds, Mr. Sir moaned. If you must know, said the warden, I liked it better when you smoked. For a second, Mr. Sir's pain seemed to recede. He took several deep breaths, then his head jerked violently, and he let out a shrill scream, which was the worse than the one before. I suggest you go back to your hole now. Stanley started to go, but Mr. Sir lay in the way. Stanley could see the muscles on his face jump with a twitch. His body writhed in agony. Stanley stepped carefully over him. Is he? Excuse me? Said the warden. Stanley was frightened to speak. He's not going to die, the warden said, unfortunately for you. Chapter 21. It was a long walk back to his hole. Stanley looked out to the haze of heat and the dirt of the other boys, lowering and waving their shovels. Group D was the farthest away. He realized again he would be digging longer after everyone else had quit. He hoped he'd finish before Mr. Sir recovered. He didn't want to be out there alone with Mr. Sir. He won't die, the warden said. Unfortunately for you. Walking across the desolated wasteland, Stanley thought about his great-grandfather, not the pig stealer, but the pig stealer's son, the one who was robbed by Kissing Kate Barlow. He tried to imagine how much he had felt about after Katie had left him stranded in the desert. It probably wasn't a whole difference from the way he himself felt now. Katie Barlow had left his great-grandfather to face a hot, barren sun in the desert. The warden left Stanley to face Mr. Sir. Somehow his great-grandfather had survived for 17 days before he was rescued by a couple of rattlesnake hunters. He was insane when they found him. When he asked how he lived so long, he said, found a refuge on God's thumb. He spent nearly a month in the hospital. He ended up marrying one of the nurses. Nobody ever knew what he meant by God's thumb, including himself. Stanley heard a twitching sound. He stopped in mid-step, with one foot still in the air. The rattlesnake lay coiled beneath his foot. His tail was pointed upwards, rattling. Backed his leg away, then turned and ran. The rattlesnake didn't chase him after. It had rattled its tail to warn him to stay away. Thanks for the warning, Stanley whispered as his heart pounded. The rattlesnake could have been more dangerous if it didn't have a rattle. Hey, caveman, called Armpit. You're still alive. What did the warden say? asked X-Ray. What did you tell her? I told her I stole the seeds, said Stanley. Good going, said Magnet. What did she do? Stanley shrugged one shoulder. Nothing. She got mad at Mr. Sir for bothering her. He didn't like going into the details. He didn't talk about it, then maybe it didn't happen. He went over to his hole, and to his surprise, it was nearly finished. He stared at it amazed. It didn't make sense. Or perhaps he did. He smiled. Since he had taken the blame for the sunflower seeds, he realized the other boys had dug the hole for him. Hey, thanks, he said. Don't look at me, said X-Ray. Confused, Stanley looked around from Magnet to Armpit to Zigzag to Squid. None of them took credit for me. Then he turned to Zero, who had been quietly digging in his hole since Stanley's return. Zero's hole was smaller than all the others. Stanley was the first one finished. He spat in his hole, then showered, and then changed into his cleaner set of clothes. It had been 3 days since the laundry had been done, so even his clean set was dirty and smelly. Tomorrow, those would become his work clothes, and the other set would be washed. He could think of no reason why Zero would dig his hole for him. Zero didn't get any sunflower seeds. I guess he likes digging holes, Armpit had said. He's a mole, Zigzag had said. I think he eats dirt. Moles don't eat dirt, X-Ray had pointed out. Worms eat dirt. Hey, Zero, Squid had asked. Are you a mole or are you a worm? Zero said nothing. Stanley never even thanked him, but he sat on his cot and waited for Zero to return from the shower cot. Thanks, he said as Zero entered the tent flap. Zero glanced at him and went over the case, where he deposited his dirty clothes and towels. Why did you help me? Zero turned around. You didn't steal the sunflower seeds, so neither did you, said Stanley. Zero stared at it. His eyes seemed to expand, and it was almost as if Zero were looking right through him. You didn't steal the sneakers, he said. Stanley said nothing. He watched Zero walk out of the tent. If anybody had X-ray vision, it was Zero. Wait, he called, then hurried out after him. Zero had just dropped outside the tent. Stanley almost ran into him. I'll try and teach you if you want reading or not, Stanley offered. I don't know if I know how to teach, but I'm not worn out today, since you dug a lot of my hole. Zero's smile spread across Zero's face. They returned to the tent, where they were less likely to be bothered. Stanley got his lunchbox box of stationery and a pen out of his crate, then sat down on the ground. Do you know the alphabet? Stanley asked. For a second, he thought he saw a flash of deadness in Zero's eyes, but it passed. I think I know some of it, Zero said. A, B, C, D. Keep going, said Stanley. Zero's eyes looked upwards. E, F, said Stanley. G, said Zero. He blew some air out of the side of his mouth. H, I, K, P, H, I, J, K, L. That's right, said Zero. I've heard it before. I just don't have memorized it exactly. That's all right, said Stanley. Here, I'll say the whole thing. You just kind of have to refresh your memory. Then you can try it. He recited the alphabets for Zero. Zero repeated it without a single mistake. Not for a bat who had never seen Sesame Street. Well, I've heard it before somewhere, Zero said, trying to act like it was nothing, but his big smile gave him away. Teach him to recognize each letter. He gave Zero a piece of paper and took a piece for himself. I guess we'll start with A. He printed a capital A, and then Zero copied on a sheet of paper. The paper wasn't lined, which made it more difficult, but Zero's A wasn't bad, just a little big. Stanley told him he needed to write smaller or else they'll run out of paper really quickly. Zero printed it smaller. Actually, there's 2 ways to write each letter, Stanley said, as he realized he was going to be even harder than he thought. This is a capital A, but you usually see a small a. You only have capitals in the beginning of a word, and only if it's the start of a sentence, or it's a proper noun like a name. Zero nodded as if he understood, but Stanley knew that he had made a very little sense. He printed a lowercase and then Zero copied it. There are 52, said Zero. Stanley didn't know what he was talking about. Instead of 26 letters, there are actually 52. Stanley looked at him, surprised. I guess that's right. How'd you figure that out? He said. Zero said nothing. Zero said nothing. Did you add? Zero said nothing. Did you multiply? That's just how many there are, said Zero. Stanley raised and lowered one shoulder. He didn't even know how Zero knew there were 26 in the first place. How did he count them and then he recited them? Zero had write a few more uppercase and lowercase a's, Then he moved on to a capital B. This was gonna take a long time, he realized. You can teach me 10 letters a day, 5 capital and 5 smalls. After 5 days, I'll know them all. Except the last day, you'll have to teach me 12. 6 capitals and 6 smalls. Again, Stanley stared at him, amazed that he was able to figure all that out. Zero must have thought he was starting for a new reason, because he said, I'll dig part of your hole every day. I can dig for about an hour, then you can teach me for about an hour. Since I'm a faster digger anyway, our holes will get done about the same time. I won't have to wait for you. Okay, Stanley agreed. As Zero was printing his piece, Stanley asked him how he figured out it would take 5 days. Did you multiply? Did you divide? That's just what it is. I'm good at math. It's good math, said Stanley. I'm not stupid, Zero said. I know everybody thinks I am. I just don't like answering their questions. Like that. Later that night, he lay on his cot. Stanley recognized the deal he had made with Zero. Getting a break every day would be a relief, but he knew X-Ray wouldn't like it. He wondered if there might be some way X-Ray could... Zero would agree to dig part of X-Ray's hole as well. But then, again, why should he? I'm the one teaching Zero. I'll need the break so I have the energy to teach him. I'm the one who took the blame for the sunflower seeds. I'm the one Mr. Sir is mad at. He closed his eyes and imagined images from the warden's cabinet floated inside his head. Red fingernails, Mr. Sir writhing on the floor, her flower kit makeup kit. He opened his eyes. He suddenly realized there had been he's seen the golden tube before. He's seen it in his mother's bathroom. He's seen it again in the warden's cabinet. It was in half of a lipstick container. KB? He felt a jolt of astonishment. His mouth suddenly formed the name Kate Barlow, as he wondered about belonged to Kissing Outlaw. 110 years ago, Camp Green Lake was the largest lake in Texas. Chapter 23. It was full of clear, cool water, and it sparkled like a giant emerald in the sun. It was especially beautiful in the spring when the peach trees lined the shore bloomed with pink and rose-colored blossoms. There were always a town picnic on the 4th of July. They played games, dance, sing, and swim in the lake to keep cool. Prizes were awarded to the best peach pie and the peach jam. A special prize was given to Miss Catherine Barlow for fabulous spiced peaches. No one else even tried to make spiced peaches because they knew none could be as delicious as hers. Every summer, Miss Catherine would pick a bushel of peaches and preserve them in jars with cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg, and the other spices she kept secret. The jarred peach would last all winter. They probably would have lasted longer than that, but they were always eaten by the end of winter. It was said that Camp Green Lake was heaven on earth, and the Miss Catherine spice peaches were the angels. Mr. Catherine Barlow was the town's only school teacher. She taught in one one-room schoolhouse. It was old even then. The roof leaked, the windows couldn't open, the door hung crooked on its bent hinges. She was a wonderful teacher, full of knowledge and full of life. The children loved her. She taught classes in the evening for adults, and many adults loved her as well. She was pretty. Her classes were often full of young men who were a lot more interested in the teacher when they were getting an education. But all they ever got was an education. Such as the young man, Trout Walker. His name is Charles Walker, but everybody calls him Trout because his 2 feet smell like a couple of dead fish. This wasn't entirely Trout's fault. He had an incredible foot fungus. In fact, it was the same foot fungus that 110 years ago would afflict the famous ball player Cy Livingston. But at least Cy Livingston showered every day. I took a bath every Sunday morning. Trout was back, whether I need to or not. Most everyone in Camp Green Lake would expect Miss Catherine to marry Trout Walker. He was the son of the richest man in the country. His family owned the most peach trees and all the land in the east side of the lake. Trout often showed up at night at school but never paid attention. He talked in class and was disrespectful of the students around him. He was loud and stupid. A lot of men in the town were not educated. That did not bother Miss Catherine. She knew that they spent most of their lives working on farms and ranches. They had not much school. That's why she was here to teach them. But Trout didn't want to learn. She seemed to be proud of her stupidity. But how do you like to take a ride on my boat this Sunday? She asked her one evening after class. No, thank you, said Miss Catherine. We got a brand new boat, he said. You don't even have to row. Yes, I know, said Miss Catherine. Everyone in the town had seen and heard the Walker's new boat. It was made a horrible loud noise and spewed ugly black smoke over the beautiful lake. Trout had always gotten everything he wanted. He found it hard to believe that Miss Catherine had turned him down. No one says no to Charles Walker. I believe I just did, said Catherine Barlow. Chapter 24. Stanley was half asleep when he got in line for breakfast, but the sight of Mr. Sir awakened him. The left side of Mr. Sir's face had swollen as a cantaloupe. There were 3 dark purple jagged lines running on his cheek where the warden had scratched him. The other boys in Stanley's tent had seen Mr. Sir as well, but they had the good sense not to say anything. Mr. Stanley put a carton of juice on a plastic spoon on his tray. He kept his eye down and hardly breathed as Mr. Sir laid it as some oatmeal stuff into his bowl. He brought his tray onto the table. Behind him, a boy from one of the other tents. Hey, what happened to your face? There was a crash. Stanley turned to see Mr. Holt holding the boy's face against the oatmeal pot. Is something wrong with my face? Both tried to speak, but he couldn't. Mr. Sir had him by the throat. Does anyone see anything wrong with my face? As he continued to choke the boy, nobody said anything. Mr. Sir let the boy go. He banged his head against the table as he fell down. Mr. Sir stood over him and asked, how does my face look to you now? Gargling sounds came out of the boy's mouth. Then he managed to gasp the words, fine. I'm kind of handsome, don't you think? Yes, Mr. Sir. Out on the lake, the other boys asked Stanley what he knew about Mr. Sir's face, but he shrugged and dipped his hole. If he didn't talk about it, maybe it would go away. He worked as hard as fast as he could, not trying to pace himself. He just wanted to get off the lake and away from Mr. Sir as soon as possible. Besides, he knew he'd get a break. Whenever you're ready, just let me know, Zero had said. The first time the water truck came, it was driven by Mr. Pendeski. The second time, Mr. Sir was driving. No one said anything except, thank you, Mr. Sir, as he filled each canteen. Don't even dare to look at his squint face. As Stanley waited, he ran his tongue over the roof of his mouth and inside his cheek. The mouth was as dry as parched as the lake. The bright sun reflected out of the mirror of the truck, and then Stanley had to shield his eyes with his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Sir," said Magnet, as he took his canteen from him. "You thirsty, Caveman?" Mr. Sir asked. "Yes, Mr. Sir." Stanley holding canteen, and Mr. Sir opened the nozzle and water flowed out, but it did not go onto Stanley's canteen. Instead, he held the right canteen right next to the stream of water. Stanley watched the water splatter on the dirt, where it was quickly absorbed by the thirsty ground. Mr. Sir let the water run about, then stopped. "You want some more?" he asked. Stanley didn't say anything. Mr. Sir water back on, and again Mr. Sir watched it pour to the dirt. "There, that should be plenty." He handed it to Stanley's empty canteen. Stanley stared at the dark spot on the ground, where he shrank before his eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Sir," he said. Chapter 25. This is the end of this video. Bye!